how could a friendship, forged in the quiet rooms of a palace, bring a government to its knees? What happens when, the person meant to be the queen's most trusted companion becomes her greatest rival or her most public liability? How does a secret marriage, a whispered rumor, or a tell-all book written by a loyal servant suddenly threaten the stability of the crown itself? The role of a lady in waiting is one of quiet service and absolute discretion. But history is filled with moments when these women, standing just behind the throne, stepped out of the shadows. Their stories are not just gossip. They are about power, loyalty, betrayal, and the moments when a personal crisis became a national scandal, shaking the monarchy to its very foundations. Number 15, why did a conversation overheard at a party cause a palace crisis? A woman who served the queen for over 60 years found her career ended by a conversation that lasted less than 10 minutes. The guest she spoke to was a British-born charity founder. The palace's official response to the incident came within 24 hours, a speed almost unheard of in royal matters. Lady Susan Hussey was more than just a lady in waiting. She was a figure of immense importance within the royal household for decades. She began her service to Queen Elizabeth II in 1960. She was chosen to be a godmother to Prince William. Her role was so central that she was the one person asked to accompany the Queen in the car to her husband Prince Philip's funeral. She was a close friend, a confidante, and a keeper of institutional memory. Her title was Lady of the Household, a senior position among the Queen's ladies. After the Queen's passing, she was asked to stay on to assist at major palace events for the new King Charles III, and she was the definition of an insider. The scandal that ended her long career was not a grand political scheme or a secret love affair. It was a matter of words. In November 2022, a reception was held at Buckingham Palace. The event was focused on raising awareness about violence against women and girls. Hundreds of people attended, including Ngozi Fulani, the chief executive of the charity Sista Space. Fulani, a black British woman, was there to represent her organization's work. Lady Susan Hussey, in her role as a household member, was circulating and speaking to guests. Their conversation became the center of a storm. Fulani later recounted that Hussey had approached her and, after moving her hair to see her name badge, began to question her origins. Fulani said she was from Hackney, a borough in London. The questioning continued, with Hussey reportedly asking things like, "What part of Africa are you from?" and "Where do your people really come from?" Despite Fulani's repeated assertions that she was British, the questions persisted. For Fulani, the exchange was deeply uncomfortable, a persistent refusal to accept her British identity. Another guest, Mandu Reid, leader of the Women's Equality Party, witnessed the exchange and later corroborated Fulani's account. Reid described it as grim and like an interrogation. Fulani decided to make the incident public. She posted about her experience on social media. The story exploded. It was picked up by every major news outlet in the United Kingdom and around the world. The timing was terrible for the monarchy. The Prince and Princess of Wales were about to embark on a major tour of the United States. The palace was still dealing with the fallout from accusations of insensitivity and outdated attitudes made by Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. This incident seemed to confirm the worst criticisms. The palace's reaction was swift and decisive. A spokesperson for Prince William, who was in Boston, stated that racism has no place in our society and that it was right for Lady Susan to step aside. Buckingham Palace released its own statement calling the comments unacceptable and deeply regrettable. They announced that Lady Susan Hussey offered her profound apologies for the hurt caused and had stepped aside from her honorary role with immediate effect. They also invited Ngozi Fulani to the palace to discuss her experience personally. This event rocked the monarchy because it wasn't about ancient history. It was about the here and now. It raised urgent questions about the institution's ability to adapt to a modern, multicultural Britain. The ladies in waiting, often seen as a quaint and harmless tradition, were suddenly under a microscope. Critics saw Lady Susan then in her 80s as a symbol of an older, out-of-touch generation still holding positions of influence. The scandal wasn't just about one woman's poor choice of words. It was about whether the institution she served was capable of representing all the people of the nation. It forced a public conversation about what it means to be British and who gets to define that identity. The quiet, behind-the-scenes role of the lady-in-waiting was thrust into the center of a very loud, very public debate about race, identity, and the monarchy's place in the 21st century. The speed of her departure showed how seriously the new king took the threat to the crown's reputation. It was a clear signal that the old ways of doing things and the old ways of speaking were no longer acceptable. Number 14, could a children's governess writing a book nearly topple the crown's mystique? She was paid a weekly wage of just £1. The book she wrote sold over 2 million copies in its first year alone. For 17 years, she was one of the most trusted figures in the royal household, but she died in a small cottage, ostracized by the family she had helped raise. Marion Crawford, known affectionately as Crawfie, was not a traditional lady-in-waiting. She was the governess to the two young princesses, Elizabeth and Margaret. But her role went far beyond teaching them French and mathematics. From 1932 to 1949, she was a constant presence in their lives. She was a confidante, a playmate, and a surrogate mother figure. She was there for the abdication crisis, the coronation of their father, and the dark days of the Second World War. She knew the family's secrets, their private jokes, their fears, and their daily routines. She was, for all intents and purposes, a member of the inner circle, bound by the same unspoken code of absolute loyalty and silence. The trouble began after her retirement. In 1949, she was approached by the American publication Ladies' Home Journal. They offered her a substantial sum of money to act as a consultant for a series of articles about the royal family's private life. At the time, she was newly married and concerned about her financial future. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, gave her permission, but it came with a strict condition: the articles were to be anonymous, and she was not to reveal anything too personal. It was a fine line to walk. Crawfie, perhaps naively, believed she could control the process. She provided anecdotes and insights, thinking she was helping to paint a positive, humanizing portrait of the royals. The articles, published under the title "The Little Princesses," were a sensation. They were filled with charming, harmless stories: Princess Elizabeth neatly arranging her shoes every night, Princess Margaret's mischievous antics. The American public loved it. Encouraged by this success, and with the lines of communication with the palace becoming blurred, Crawfie agreed to publish the stories as a book in 1950. This was the step too far. When the book, also titled The Little Princesses, was published in Britain, the reaction from the royal family was one of cold fury. In their eyes, Crawfie had committed the ultimate betrayal. She had sold their privacy for profit. It didn't matter that the stories were overwhelmingly positive and affectionate. The principle was what counted. The unspoken rule, the very foundation of royal service, was that you never, ever talk. You see everything, you hear everything, and you say nothing. The consequences for Marion Crawford were swift and brutal. She was completely cut off. The family she had dedicated her life to never spoke to her again. Invitations to royal events stopped. Christmas cards were no longer sent. When she walked past them at public events, they looked straight through her. She had become a non-person. The cozy cottage, Nottingham Cottage at Kensington Palace, which had been granted to her for life, was a privilege she retained, but the warmth of her former life was gone. She became a pariah. The scandal rocked the monarchy because it shattered the carefully constructed wall between the public image and the private lives of the royals. Before Crawfie's book, the public saw the royals as distant, formal figures. Her book, for the first time, presented them as a family with quirks and personalities. While this may seem normal today in our celebrity-obsessed culture, in 1950, it was a profound shock. It set a precedent. If the trusted governess could talk, who else might? It created a new kind of threat, not from political enemies, but from the media and from those on the inside willing to supply it with stories. The royal family's reaction was so severe because they understood the danger. Once the mystique is gone, once the curtain is pulled back, it is very hard to restore. Marion Crawford's gentle, loving book was seen as an act of treason because it turned the private family into public property. She paid for it with a lifetime of regret and isolation. Number 13, what happens when a lady-in-waiting becomes a prisoner of war? She was the first woman to be a certified war correspondent. She defied Lord Kitchener the most powerful man in the British Army, to report from a besieged town. Her dispatches from the front line were read by millions, often before the official military reports reached London. Lady Sarah Wilson was not a typical Victorian aristocrat. Born of Spencer Churchill, she was the aunt of the future Prime Minister Winston Churchill. She possessed the family's famous energy and disregard for convention. She served as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Alexandra, then the Princess of Wales, a role that required tact and discretion. But Sarah's spirit was adventurous. She married Gordon Wilson, an officer in the Royal Horse Guards, and followed him to his postings, including South Africa. When the Second Boer War broke out in 1899, Sarah was in the town of Mafeking with her husband. The town was soon surrounded by Boer forces, beginning a siege that would last for 217 days and capture the imagination of the British public. Most women and non-combatants were evacuated, but Sarah refused to leave. She was determined to be useful. She helped set up a convalescent hospital for the wounded and managed its supplies, demonstrating immense courage and organizational skill. Her greatest act of defiance, however, was in her role as a journalist. Before the war, she had arranged to be a correspondent for the Daily Mail, a powerful and popular newspaper. This was an unprecedented role for a woman of her social standing. The commander of the British forces in South Africa, Lord Kitchener, was a man who did not like complications, and a female aristocrat reporting from a war zone was a major complication. He repeatedly tried to get her to leave the dangerous areas. The scandal arose from her refusal to be a passive observer. She didn't just write about hospital life, she wrote about military strategy, the morale of the troops, and the progress of the siege. Her connections gave her access to information, and her writing skill made her dispatches compelling reading. At one point, she was captured by the enemy. Her status as an aristocrat and a woman made her a high-profile prisoner. After a tense period of negotiation, she was exchanged for a Boer prisoner. Rather than retreat to safety, she immediately went back to reporting. Her actions caused a major headache for the military and the government. In an era when women were expected to be demure and stay out of public affairs, her very presence on the front line was a challenge to the established order. Her reporting sometimes contradicted the official military line, causing embarrassment in London. She was seen as a loose cannon, operating outside the strict military hierarchy. For a lady-in-waiting, a role defined by loyalty and service to the crown, to be acting with such public independence was shocking to many. She was disobeying the most powerful general in the army and creating a public narrative that the government couldn't control. This rocked the monarchy in a subtle but important way. Queen Alexandra was fond of Sarah, but her lady-in-waiting's high-profile, controversial activities reflected on the royal court. It brought a whiff of scandal and unorthodoxy to an institution that prized tradition and propriety. Sarah Wilson challenged the very definition of what a high society woman, let alone a royal attendant, was supposed to be. She proved that a woman could be as brave, resourceful, and defiant as any man. Her personal scandal was one of courage and rebellion, shaking up the rigid expectations of the Victorian and Edwardian eras, and showing that the women standing behind the throne were not always content to remain in the shadows. Number 12. How did one woman's memoirs change the public's view of a queen? The book was published more than 20 years after the author's death. It contained the private, candid opinions of a famously reserved queen on everything from politics to the abdication crisis. The author, a lady-in-waiting for over 50 years, had ordered the diaries they were based on to be burned. Mabel, Countess of Airlie, was a pillar of the British aristocracy. She began her service as a lady-in-waiting to the future Queen Mary in 1901, when Mary was the Duchess of Cornwall and York. She remained in her service through Mary's time as Princess of Wales, and then as Queen Consort, continuing until Mary's death in 1953. For more than half a century, she was one of the Queen's closest and most trusted companions. Queen Mary is remembered as a formal, imposing, and rather stern figure, the epitome of royal duty and decorum. Lady Airlie's job was to be the silent, supportive presence behind this formidable public image. Throughout her long years of service, Lady Airlie kept detailed diaries. In them she recorded not just the day-to-day events of the court, but her private conversations with the Queen. She noted the Queen's true feelings about the great events that shaped the 20th century, the First World War, the changing political landscape, and most explosively, the abdication of her son, King Edward V, in 1936. She documented the deep pain and bewilderment the crisis caused within the family, a perspective that was completely hidden from the public. Lady Airlie was a woman of her time, deeply aware of the code of silence that governed royal service. She gave explicit instructions to her family that upon her death, these diaries were to be destroyed. She understood the explosive nature of their contents. However, after her death in 1956, her granddaughter found a loophole. Lady Airlie had also written a series of letters to her own children, recounting many of the same stories and observations. And she had worked on a manuscript of memoirs which she never finished. The family decided that these materials were not covered by the instruction to burn the diaries. In 1962, a book based on these writings was published, titled Hatched with Gold: The Memoirs of Mabel, Countess of Airlie. The publication caused a sensation. It was a bombshell dropped into the carefully managed world of royal biography. For the first time, the public heard Queen Mary's voice, unfiltered and in her own words, as recorded by her closest confidante. They read of her shock at her son's decision to give up the throne for Wallis Simpson, her views on the upbringing of her granddaughters Elizabeth and Margaret, and her sharp, often witty, observations on the politicians and world leaders she met. The book revealed a far more complex, intelligent, and emotional woman than the stiff public image had ever suggested. This rocked the monarchy because, like the Crawfey story, but at a much higher level, it was a profound breach of trust, even if it happened after her death. Exposed the inner thoughts of a monarch and her family to public scrutiny. The idea that the most private conversations with a queen could one day end up in a best-selling book was horrifying to the palace establishment. It changed the dynamic between the monarch and their attendants. Could a monarch ever speak freely again, knowing their words might be recorded for posterity? The scandal wasn't one of misbehavior, but of revelation. It demystified the monarchy by showing the raw emotions behind the facade of duty. Mabel Airlie, a woman of unimpeachable loyalty in life, became, in death, the source of one of the greatest leaks of royal information in the 20th century, forever changing how Queen Mary was understood by history. Number 11. Could a queen's choice of friends threaten a government? The prime minister resigned after just 100 days in office. The crisis was not over taxes or foreign policy, but over the queen's ladies-in-waiting. The queen herself was only 20 years old and had been on the throne for less than 2 years. The year was 1839, and the young Queen Victoria was on the throne. She was heavily reliant on her first prime minister, Lord Melbourne, a member of the Whig Party. He was a father figure to her, and she adored him. Her entire household, including her closest ladies-in-waiting, were the wives and daughters of prominent Whig politicians. The most influential of these was Harriet, Duchess of Sutherland, her mistress of the robes. This was a very political court. The Queen's personal friends were also her political allies. In May 1839, Lord Melbourne's government lost a key vote in Parliament, and he resigned. The custom of the time dictated that the new Prime Minister would be Sir Robert Peel, the leader of the opposition Conservative Party known as the Tories. Peel knew he would have a difficult relationship with the young Queen, who so openly favored his opponents. To make his government work, he felt he needed to have some influence at court. He didn't ask the Queen to dismiss all her ladies, but he did request that she replace some of the most senior ones, including the Duchess of Sutherland, with ladies from Tory families. He saw it as a necessary political step to show that the new government had the Queen's confidence. Victoria was outraged. She saw Peel's request not as a political necessity, but as a personal attack. These women were not just employees, they were her dearest friends and companions. She had grown up in a lonely, isolated childhood at Kensington Palace, and these ladies were her first real circle of friends. The idea that a politician could dictate who she could have as her companions struck her as monstrous. She wrote in her journal that she would not part with her ladies. She met with Peel and flatly refused his request. She stood her ground, a young woman defying the experienced leader of a major political party. This confrontation became known as the bedchamber crisis. Peel, feeling that he could not govern effectively without the Queen's support, and with a hostile court surrounding her, told her that he could not form a government under these conditions. He gave up the attempt. This left Britain in a political vacuum. With Peel unable to form a government, Queen Victoria had no choice but to ask her old friend Lord Melbourne to return as Prime Minister. The Whigs came back into power not because they had won an election or, a vote in Parliament, but because a 20-year-old queen refused to change her friends. The scandal was immense. It was a constitutional crisis in the making. The Queen was accused of being a partisan political actor, using her personal feelings to subvert the will of Parliament. The press, particularly the Tory supporting newspapers, were vicious in their criticism. She was portrayed as a stubborn, spoiled girl being manipulated by the Whigs. The monarchy's reputation for being above politics was severely damaged. It seemed that the personal was overriding the political, and the Queen's friendships were dictating the direction of the country. In the end, Victoria learned a hard lesson about the limits of her power. 2 years later, when Peel and the Tories did come to power with a large majority, she gracefully accepted the change of her household. Her husband, Prince Albert, had helped her understand the need for the monarch to be impartial. The bedchamber crisis rocked the monarchy because it exposed the potential for a clash between the monarch's personal life and their public duty. It was a scandal born not of malice, but of a young queen's fierce loyalty to her ladies-in-waiting, a loyalty that inadvertently plunged the nation into a political crisis and taught her a lesson she would never forget. Number 10. How did a secret introduction at a party lead to an abdication? She was the person who introduced the future King of England to the woman for whom he would give up the throne. She was an American socialite who had married into the British aristocracy. Her own relationship with the Prince of Wales was a closely guarded secret that was an open secret in high society. Thelma, Viscountess Furness, was a dazzling figure in the 1920s and 30s. Born Thelma Morgan in America, she and her twin sister Gloria were celebrated beauties who moved in the highest circles of international society. Thelma married a British shipping heir, the Viscount Furness, and became a prominent hostess. Sometime around 1929, she began a relationship with Edward, the Prince of Wales, the heir to the British throne. He was charismatic, modern, and famously charming, but he was also growing tired of the stiff constraints of his royal role. Thelma was part of the fast, glamorous set he found so appealing. Her role as a lady-in-waiting was not official in the traditional sense of serving a queen, but she was an intimate companion and confidante to the future king, a position of immense trust and influence within his private court. Their relationship was well known among their friends, but kept out of the British press, which at the time had a strict code of deference to the royal family. The fateful event occurred on a weekend in January 1931. Thelma was hosting a party at her country house, Borough Court. Among the guests she invited was a fellow American, Wallis Simpson, and her husband, Ernest. Thelma had known Wallis for some time. She thought the prince might find her amusing. She made the introduction. The prince was indeed charmed by Wallis's wit and direct American manner. It was not a dramatic love at first sight moment, but it was the beginning of a connection. Thelma did not see any threat. She continued her relationship with the prince. A few years later, in 1934, Thelma had to travel to America to visit her family. Before she left, the prince was feeling lonely and asked who would look after him while she was gone. According to her own memoirs, Thelma jokingly turned to her friend Wallis and said, "Wallis, darling, you look after him for me." It was a remark she would come to regret for the rest of her life. When she returned from her trip, she found that the prince's affection had completely shifted to Wallis Simpson. She had been supplanted. The scandal that this introduction unleashed is one of the biggest in the history of the modern monarchy. The Prince of Wales, who became King Edward V in 1936, fell deeply in love with Wallis. But she was an American, and she was in the process of her second divorce. For the king, who was also the head of the Church of England, to marry a twice-divorced woman was seen as constitutionally and morally impossible by the government and the establishment. He was given a choice: the throne or the woman he loved. He chose the woman, abdicating the throne in December 1936 and plunging the monarchy into its greatest crisis of the 20th century. Thelma Furness's role in this was pivotal, if unintentional. Her introduction, a casual social act, set in motion a chain of events that led to a king giving up his crown and his brother, the future George VI, being forced onto the throne unexpectedly. The scandal rocked the monarchy by challenging its very foundations of duty, tradition, and stability. It created a deep rift within the royal family that lasted for decades. And at the heart of it was a lady of the court, a confidant, who brought a new person into the circle, never imagining that this simple social gesture would change the course of British history. Her story is a stark reminder of how the private social lives of royals and the people they trust can have profound and unpredictable public consequences. Number 9, can a whispered rumor in a palace hallway destroy a woman's life? She was accused of being pregnant by the royal doctor based on nothing more than her appearance. She was forced to undergo an intimate medical examination against her will. The queen, who allowed the rumors to spread, was only 20 years old and later called the affair a stain on her reign. Lady Flora Hastings was a lady-in-waiting in the household of the Duchess of Kent, Queen Victoria's mother. The court of the young Queen Victoria in 1839 was a place of factions and intrigue. There was intense rivalry and dislike between the Queen's camp, led by Prime Minister Lord Melbourne and the governess Baroness Leyson, and the Duchess of Kent's circle at Kensington Palace, which included Lady Flora and the Duchess's controversial advisor Sir John Conroy. Queen Victoria despised Conroy and suspected him of manipulating her mother. Lady Flora, by association, was viewed with deep suspicion. In early 1839, Lady Flora returned to the palace after a visit to her family in Scotland. Over the next few weeks, some of the other ladies in the court noticed that her abdomen seemed swollen. The rumor started to spread Lady Flora, an unmarried 33-year-old woman, must be pregnant. The suspicion immediately fell on Sir John Conroy, a married man. It was a vicious, politically motivated rumor aimed at discrediting the Duchess of Kent's household. The young Queen Victoria heard the rumors and, disliking both Lady Flora and Conroy, she believed them. The court physician, Sir James Clark, was brought in. He examined Lady Flora and, despite her denials, declared that she was pregnant. He told her that the only way to clear her name was to submit to a physical examination. Lady Flora was horrified. She refused, but the pressure mounted. The Queen insisted. Finally, facing the complete destruction of her reputation, Lady Flora agreed to the examination on the condition that her own family doctor was also present. The examination proved her innocence. She was not pregnant. The swelling in her abdomen was caused by a large cancerous tumor on her liver. The diagnosis was a death sentence, but the damage to her name had already been done. The Hastings family was furious at the way she had been treated. They demanded a public apology and the dismissal of Sir James Clark. When the palace tried to keep the matter quiet, her brother wrote an angry letter to the newspapers, and the whole sordid affair became public knowledge. The scandal of the unfortunate Lady Flora was on the front page of every paper. The public was horrified. They saw a cruel, inexperienced young queen and her gossiping courtiers hounding an innocent woman to her deathbed. There were public demonstrations against the queen. She was hissed at when she appeared in public at Ascot. Her popularity, once so high, plummeted. The monarchy was seen as a nest of vicious gossip and injustice. Lady Flora Hastings died in July 1839. Her family insisted on a post-mortem examination to prove her innocence beyond any doubt, and the results were published. The entire affair was a disaster for the young Queen Victoria. It was her first major misstep as a monarch, and it was a cruel one. She had allowed her personal dislikes and the political rivalries of her court to lead to the public humiliation and torment of an innocent woman. The scandal rocked the monarchy by revealing the ugly human side of court life. It showed how a queen's personal judgment could be clouded, and how the insulated world of the palace could breed a culture of suspicion and cruelty. For Victoria, it was a deeply painful lesson in justice and the responsibilities of a sovereign, a mistake that she regretted for the rest of her long reign. Number 8. Why would a queen banish her cousin and chief lady in waiting from court. She was the queen's first cousin, and one of her closest friends from childhood. She secretly married the queen's greatest favorite, a man many believed the queen herself wanted to marry. When the queen found out, she flew into a rage and banished her from court for years. Lettice Knollys was a figure of remarkable prominence in the court of Queen Elizabeth I. She was the daughter of Catherine Carey, who was the daughter of Mary Boleyn, Anne Boleyn's sister. This made her Elizabeth's first cousin once removed, and she bore a striking physical resemblance to the queen. She was beautiful, vivacious, and ambitious. She came to court as a maid of honor and quickly became one of the queen's favorites, eventually rising to become a lady of the bedchamber. Her life was intertwined with that of Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. Dudley was the queen's childhood friend and for most of her reign her constant companion and favorite. The nature of their relationship was the subject of intense speculation. Many believed Elizabeth loved him and would have married him if it had been politically possible. He held a unique and powerful position at court, and the queen was notoriously jealous of any woman who captured his attention. Lettice first married the Viscount Hereford, who later became the Earl of Essex. They had a family, and she was a respectable, high-ranking noblewoman. But during her husband's long service in Ireland, rumors began to circulate about a growing closeness between Lettice and Robert Dudley. Her husband died in Ireland in 1576. 2 years later, in 1578, Lettice and Dudley were secretly married. They knew that the queen's reaction would be volcanic, so they kept it hidden for as long as they could. The secret eventually came out. An enemy of Dudley at court made sure the news reached the queen. Elizabeth's reaction was even more extreme than they had feared. She felt utterly betrayed both by the man she loved and by the cousin she had trusted. She saw the marriage as a personal affront and a challenge to her own position. She reportedly boxed Lettice's ears and called her a she-wolf. She placed Robert Dudley under house arrest and banished Lettice from court permanently. This was not a small matter. Banishment from the royal court was social and political death. It meant being cut off from the center of all power, patronage, and influence in the kingdom. For a woman of Lettice's rank and ambition, it was a devastating punishment. For the rest of Elizabeth's long reign, Lettice was never allowed to return to her position. She was an outcast. She tried repeatedly to gain the queen's forgiveness, but Elizabeth was implacable. The rivalry between the two red-headed cousins, the Queen of England and the Countess of Leicester, became one of the great personal dramas of the Elizabethan age. The scandal rocked the monarchy because it exposed the raw human emotions of the supposedly untouchable virgin queen. And Elizabeth's political image was built on her being wedded only to her country. This marriage challenged that narrative. It demonstrated that her personal feelings, especially her jealousy and sense of betrayal, could have severe political consequences for even the most powerful people in her kingdom. The banishment of a high-ranking lady-in-waiting, a blood relative, over a marriage sent a clear message to the entire court about the dangers of crossing the queen in matters of the heart. It blurred the line between the queen's public role and her private attachments, showing that in Elizabeth's court, love and politics were a dangerous and inseparable mix. Number 7, how could marrying a national hero lead to a lady-in-waiting's imprisonment? She was one of the queen's most favored maids of honor. He was the queen's dashing favorite, a famous explorer, poet, and soldier. Their secret marriage so enraged the queen that she had them both arrested and imprisoned in the Tower of London. Elizabeth Bess. Throckmorton was a young, intelligent, and high-spirited lady in waiting at the court of Queen Elizabeth I in the late 1580s and early 1590s. As a maid of honor, she was part of the queen's innermost circle, a group of young, unmarried women who were her constant companions. The queen demanded their absolute loyalty and devotion. She saw them as her personal property and was fiercely possessive of them, especially when it came to marriage. She expected to be consulted on any potential match and often forbade marriages she did not approve of. Sir Walter Raleigh was one of the great figures of the age. He was a favorite of the queen who admired his sharp mind, his ambition, and his flamboyant style. He was an explorer who had established colonies in the New World, a sea captain who fought against the Spanish, and a gifted poet. His relationship with the Queen was complex. It was one of flattery, patronage, and intense intellectual connection. He owed his wealth and position entirely to her favor. Sometime in 1591, Bess Throckmorton and Walter Raleigh began a secret romance. They knew the risks. The Queen's jealousy concerning her favorites and her ladies was legendary. A secret marriage was an act of profound defiance. Nevertheless, they were married in secret. Bess soon found herself pregnant, a fact that could not be hidden for long at court. She tried to conceal her condition and even continued her duties, but the secret was bound to come out. In 1592, the truth was revealed. When Queen Elizabeth discovered that her favored lady-in-waiting and her star courtier had not only fallen in love, but had married and had a child without her knowledge or permission, her fury was absolute. She saw it as a monstrous betrayal and a personal insult. It was an act of deception carried out right under her nose. She felt she had been made a fool of. Her revenge was swift. She ordered both Bess and Raleigh to be arrested and sent to the Tower of London. A prison cell in the Tower was a terrifying prospect, often a prelude to a more permanent fate. Bess was separated from her newborn son. The scandal was the talk of the court and the country. The Queen's two favorites had been cast down from the heights of power to the depths of a prison because of a secret marriage. It was a stunning demonstration of the Queen's power and her wrath. Eventually, Raleigh was able to buy his way out of the Tower by turning over a large share of the prize money from a captured Spanish ship. Bess was also released, but they were not forgiven. They were banished from court, the center of their world. For several years, they lived in political exile on their country estates. Raleigh struggled to regain the Queen's favor, but their relationship was never the same. He had lost his privileged position as the Queen's intimate advisor. This scandal rocked the monarchy by showing the absolute and sometimes tyrannical nature of Queen Elizabeth's personal rule. It wasn't a matter of state treason. It was a matter of personal loyalty. The Queen's emotional reaction to a perceived betrayal had immediate and severe consequences for a national hero and a high-ranking lady of her court. It sent a chill through the court, reminding everyone that their fortunes and even their freedom depended entirely on the Queen's personal whim. It demonstrated that in the Elizabethan world, the Queen's authority extended not just over matters of state, but deep into the private lives of those who served her. Number 6, could a Queen's best friend wield more power than the Prime Minister? She held no official government post, yet she could influence military appointments, church positions, and government policy. Her friendship with the Queen was so intense that they had pet names for each other, Mrs. Morley for the Queen and Mrs. Freeman for herself. When their friendship ended, it contributed to the fall of a government and the end of a war. Sarah Churchill, Duchess of Marlborough, was one of the most powerful women in English history. Her story is inseparable from that of Queen Anne. Their friendship began when they were young girls. Anne was a shy, often overlooked princess, and Sarah was a beautiful, intelligent, and fiercely opinionated young woman. Sarah became Anne's lady of the bedchamber, but their relationship was far more than that of a monarch and her attendant. They were devoted best friends. Sarah's husband, John Churchill, became the Duke of Marlborough, a military genius who would lead the British and Allied armies to victory in the War of the Spanish Succession. When Anne became queen in 1702, Sarah's influence reached its peak. She was not only the mistress of the robes and groom of the stole, the highest positions a woman could hold at court, but she was the Queen's closest confidante and political advisor. The Queen trusted her completely. Sarah used this position to advance the cause of the Whig Party, which she and her husband strongly supported. She relentlessly lobbied the Queen to give Whigs positions in the government and to pursue the war against France with vigor. For years, her influence was almost absolute. The letters between Mers Morley and Mers Freeman show Sarah advising and often lecturing the Queen on every aspect of policy. The scandal was the slow, painful, and very public collapse of this powerful friendship. The two women began to drift apart. Queen Anne grew tired of Sarah's domineering personality and her constant political pressure. She was a devout Tory and a supporter of the Church of England, and she became increasingly uncomfortable with the Whig policies Sarah was pushing. A new figure entered the scene, Abigail Hill, a poor cousin of Sarah's whom Sarah had introduced to court as a minor attendant. Abigail was quiet, gentle, and deferential to the Queen. She was also a Tory. A new secret friendship blossomed between Queen Anne and Abigail Hill. Abigail became the Queen's new confidante, offering the gentle support that Sarah no longer did. She also became a channel for Tory politicians, especially the leader Robert Harley, to gain the Queen's ear. Sarah saw her influence slipping away, and she was furious. She confronted the Queen, accused her of having a secret relationship with Abigail, and fought bitterly to regain her position. Her attempts backfired. Her angry, demanding letters and confrontations only drove the Queen further away. The final break came in 710. After a furious argument, the Queen demanded that Sarah return her gold key, the symbol of her office. Sarah was dismissed from all her positions at court. The political consequences were enormous. With Sarah gone, the Queen felt free to assert her own Tory sympathies. She dismissed the Whig government, which had been dominated by Marlborough's allies, and brought in a Tory government led by Robert Harley. This new government began peace negotiations with France, eventually leading to the Treaty of Utrecht, which ended the Long War. The Duke of Marlborough was dismissed from his command. The falling out between a queen and her lady in waiting directly led to a change in government and a shift in foreign policy. It rocked the monarchy by revealing just how much personal relationships at the heart of the court could shape the destiny of the nation. The power of a backstairs favorite, whether it was Sarah or her replacement Abigail, could be greater than that of elected ministers in Parliament. It was a scandal of political intrigue, personal betrayal, and the profound impact of a broken friendship on the stage of world history. Number 5. What made a king change? The law of treason for his young queen. She was a lady in waiting to one queen and became a queen herself less than a month after her predecessor's death. She was queen for only 17 months. Her downfall was so swift that the king had to pass a new law making it treason for a woman with a past to marry him. Catherine Howard was the 5th wife of King Henry V. She came to court as a young lady in waiting to Henry's 4th wife, Anne of Cleves. Catherine was a niece of the powerful Duke of Norfolk, a leader of the conservative faction at court, who sought to restore the old religious ways. She was young, vivacious, and by all accounts charming. The aging king, who was deeply disappointed with his marriage to Anne of Cleves, was quickly infatuated with her. He called her his rose without a thorn. Soon after his marriage to Anne of Cleves was annulled, Henry married Catherine in July 1540. She was a teenager, he was nearly 50, overweight, and plagued by a painful leg ulcer. For a time, the king was blissfully happy. He doted on his young wife, showering her with gifts. She brought a youthful energy back to the court, but Catherine had a past. Before coming to court, she had lived in the household of her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. The supervision there was lax, and she had been involved in relationships with 2 men, Henry Manox, her music teacher, and Francis Dereham, a gentleman in the Duchess's service. Her relationship with Dereham in particular had been serious. They had reportedly exchanged promises to marry, which, under the laws of the time, could be considered a binding pre-contract. The scandal broke in the autumn of 1541. While the king and queen were on a royal progress to the north of England, a man named John Lascelles sought an audience with Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. Lascelles' sister had been a servant in the Dowager Duchess's household and knew all about Catherine's past. And he told Cranmer everything. Cranmer, a religious reformer and an enemy of the conservative Howard family, knew he had to act, but he also knew the king's temper. He chose to give the king a letter containing the accusations during Mass, knowing Henry would read it in private. Henry at first refused to believe it. He was convinced it was a plot by his enemies, but he ordered an investigation. The evidence quickly mounted. Manox and Dereham were found and questioned. They confessed. The king was devastated. His rose without a thorn was tainted. The situation went from bad to worse when the investigation uncovered that Catherine had also been foolishly indiscreet as queen. She had appointed Francis Dereham as her private secretary and had been meeting secretly with a young courtier named Thomas Culpeper, a favorite of the king. The king's infatuation turned to furious self-pity and a desire for revenge. Catherine was arrested. Francis Dereham and Thomas Culpeper were executed. The problem for the government was that Catherine's past actions, which had happened before she even met the king, were not technically treason. To solve this, a bill of attainder was passed by Parliament, a special law that declared a person guilty without a trial. The act also made it treason for an unchaste woman to marry the king without revealing her past to him. Catherine Howard was executed at the Tower of London in February 1542. She was barely 20 years old. Her story rocked the monarchy because it was a brutal demonstration of the king's power and vulnerability. It exposed the sordid underbelly of court politics, where a young woman could be used as a pawn by her powerful family and then destroyed when her past came to light. The scandal led to a direct change in the law, customizing the definition of treason to fit the king's marital misfortunes. It was a tragic and brutal end for a young lady in waiting who rose to the highest position in the land, only to be destroyed by the secrets she brought with her. Number 4, how did an accusation against a lady in waiting damage? A prime minister. She was a close friend and lady in waiting to Queen Victoria for over 40 years. Her involvement in passing a private, critical letter from the Queen to the Prime Minister's office became a public scandal. The Prime Minister, William Gladstone, believed it contributed to the collapse of his government. Jane Loftus, the Marchioness of Ely, was one of Queen Victoria's most trusted and longest-serving ladies in waiting. She was not a political firebrand like Sarah Churchill or a tragic victim like Lady Flora Hastings. She was the model of a discreet, loyal, and supportive courtier. Her relationship with the Queen was deeply personal and built on decades of shared experience, from state occasions to private grief. The scandal she became embroiled in was complex and revolved around the intense political battles of the late 19th century. The main players were Queen Victoria and her 4-time Prime Minister, William Gladstone. The Queen and Gladstone had a famously difficult relationship. She found him cold, overly formal, and she disagreed strongly with many of his liberal policies, especially his stance on Ireland and his reforms of the army. She much preferred his great rival, the Conservative leader Benjamin Disraeli. The crisis came to a head in 1873 during Gladstone's first government. A major piece of legislation, the Irish University Bill, was defeated in the House of Commons. This was a significant blow to Gladstone and his government. At the same time, a separate scandal was brewing concerning the misuse of funds at the post office, which implicated some members of the government. The Queen was following events closely from her residence at Osborne House. She was deeply concerned about the state of the government and the country. She wrote a private and highly critical letter to her private secretary, Henry Ponsonby, expressing her alarm. In this letter, she mentioned that she had heard rumors that even Mr. Gladstone's own private secretaries were in a state of terror about the post office affair. This was sensitive private correspondence from the monarch about her own government. This is where Lady Ely became involved. Ponsonby, the Queen's secretary, shared the contents of the Queen's letter with his wife Mary. Mary Ponsonby was a close friend of Lady Ely. Lady Ely, in turn, was friends with the wife of Algernon West, who was one of Gladstone's private secretaries. In what was a major indiscretion, Lady Ely passed on the Queen's comments to Mrs. West, who then told her husband. The news that the Queen was privately commenting on the terror in his own office reached Gladstone. Gladstone was furious. He saw this as evidence of a backstairs conspiracy against him at court. He felt that the Queen's private hostility was being spread by her household and was undermining his authority. He believed that the Queen's ladies, particularly Lady Ely, were part of a hostile court environment that was actively working against his government. While his government was already in trouble, he later cited this incident and the general atmosphere of court hostility as one of the factors that made his position untenable. He resigned shortly after. The scandal of the leaked Letter rocked the monarchy by exposing the tense and often dysfunctional relationship between the aging queen and her prime minister. It highlighted the political influence, whether intentional or not, of the royal household. Lady Ely's indiscretion, a simple act of passing gossip between friends, had major political repercussions. It fueled Gladstone's paranoia about the court and damaged the principle of trust that is supposed to exist between a monarch and her head of government. It was a scandal not of malice, but of the dangerous intersection between private friendships, court gossip, and high politics. Number 3, did a lady-in-waiting's book excuse a princess's bad behavior? Her memoir, published when she was 87 years old, became an instant bestseller. It revealed intimate details about life with one of the most controversial royals of the 20th century. Critics accused her of trying to excuse decades of difficult behavior by blaming the princess's upbringing. Lady Anne Glenconner had a unique and lifelong connection to the royal family. She grew up with the future Queen Elizabeth II and Princess Margaret. They were her childhood playmates. In 1953, she was a maid of honor at the Queen's coronation. For over 30 years, she served as a lady-in-waiting to Princess Margaret. This was not a distant, formal role. She was a close friend and confidante, a travel companion, and an organizer of Margaret's private life, including her holidays on the Caribbean island of Mustique, which Lady Anne's husband owned and developed. Princess Margaret was a complex figure, glamorous, artistic, and witty, but also known for being demanding, imperious, and often downright rude. She was a heavy smoker and drinker, and her private life, particularly her divorce from Lord Snowdon and her relationship with a younger man, Roddy Llewellyn, caused considerable controversy. Throughout it all, Lady Anne was by her side, a figure of unwavering loyalty. For decades after Princess Margaret's death in 2002, Lady Anne remained silent, adhering to the traditional code of the lady-in-waiting. And then in 2019, she published her memoir, Laddie-in-Waiting: My Extraordinary Life in the Shadow of the Crown. The book was shockingly candid. It was filled with affectionate but also revealing anecdotes about Princess Margaret's behavior. She described the princess's sharp tongue, her snobbery, and her often difficult demands. She recounted stories of Margaret clashing with world leaders and celebrities, and the challenges of managing her moods. But the book was not just a collection of gossip. Lady Anne's central argument was that Margaret's behavior was a direct result of her unique and often tragic position. She was the spare to the heir. Her older sister Elizabeth had a clearly defined destiny from a young age. Margaret's role was uncertain. She was royal, but with no real job. She was denied the chance to marry the man she first loved, Peter Townsend, because he was a divorce, a sacrifice that cast a long shadow over her life. Lady Anne argued that Margaret's infamous rudeness was a defense mechanism, a product of her deep intelligence and frustration at having no meaningful outlet for her talents. The publication of the book was a scandal in itself. It was another major breach of the never complain, never explain ethos of the royal household. While not as shocking as the Crawfey book had been in its day, it was a far more intimate and psychologically analytical look at a senior royal than had ever been written by a member of their inner circle. Some critics accused Lady Anne of betraying her friend's trust, even in death. Others felt she was making excuses for a lifetime of bad behavior. The book forced a re-evaluation of Princess Margaret. Was she a tragic, misunderstood figure, or simply a spoiled royal? The book rocked the monarchy because it provided an insider's account that both humanized and criticized a senior royal. It peeled back the layers of formality in a way that had never been done before by someone so close to the family. It raised questions about the psychological cost of being a spare in the royal system, a theme that has continued to resonate with younger generations of royals. Lady Anne Glenconner, the loyal lady-in-waiting, used her unique position to write a book that changed the public narrative about her princess, sparking a debate about the pressures and pathologies of royal life that continues to this day. Number 2 was a royal companion's social circle too dangerous for the crown. She was an unofficial lady-in-waiting and close friend to the Queen Mother for decades. Her social circle in Kenya was known for its decadent and wild lifestyle. Her first husband was acquitted in a famous trial for the murder of her lover. Idina Sackville, known as Lady Idina Gordon, was a British aristocrat who became a central figure in the notorious Happy Valley set of colonial Kenya in the 1920s and 30s. She was known for her beauty, her disregard for convention, and her multiple marriages. She was the cousin of Vida Sackville West and a charismatic leading figure in a community of wealthy British expatriates known for their hard-partying, bohemian lifestyle. One of her husbands was Jocelyn Hay, the 22nd Earl of Errol. They moved to Kenya and became the king and queen of the Happy Valley scene. Their life was one of lavish parties, drinking, and a complex web of romantic entanglements. Idina and the Earl of Errol eventually divorced. He then married another woman, Mary. In 1941, the Earl of Errol was found shot dead in his car on a road outside Nairobi. The prime suspect was another member of their circle, Sir Jock Delves Broughton, a wealthy baronet whose new, much younger wife, Diana, was having a very public affair with Errol. The ensuing trial was a global sensation. It exposed the decadent and amoral lifestyle of the Happy Valley set to a shocked public back in Britain, which was then in the midst of the Second World War. The details that emerged from the trial painted a picture of a privileged and irresponsible elite. Broughton was eventually acquitted, and the murder remains officially unsolved to this day. The connection to the royal family comes through Diana, the woman at the center of the love triangle. After Broughton's death, she married again, this time to Gilbert Colville, one of the wealthiest landowners in Kenya. After his death, she married for a fourth time to Thomas Cholmondeley, the fourth Baron Delamere. As Lady Delamere, she became one of the most powerful and influential figures in Kenyan society. And she also became a very close friend of the Queen Mother Elizabeth. Their friendship was deep and genuine. The Queen Mother would often stay with Lady Delamere on her visits to Kenya. Diana, Lady Delamere, was an unofficial but highly important lady in waiting and companion during these trips. She was part of the Queen Mother's inner circle. This connection was a source of quiet scandal and concern for the palace. Lady Delamere's past was inextricably linked to the infamous Happy Valley murder trial. She was the woman at the center of it all. Her association with a world of decadence and scandal was seen as a potential embarrassment to the monarchy. The press, particularly in later years, would periodically resurrect the story of the unsolved murder, and her name, and by extension her connection to the Queen Mother, would be mentioned. The scandal rocked the monarchy in a subtle but persistent way. It was a matter of reputation by association. The crown is supposed to be a symbol of stability, duty, and moral rectitude. The close friendship between a senior royal and a woman so closely linked to one of the most infamous scandals of the 20th century created a jarring contrast. It provided ammunition for critics who saw the aristocracy and the monarchy as out of touch and morally lax. The story of Lady Delamere and her past was a constant, low-level threat, a reminder of a decadent world that the palace would have preferred to keep at a distance. It showed that even the most personal friendships of the royals could have public relations consequences, linking the dignified image of the Queen Mother to a dark, unsolved mystery from a wilder shore. Number one, did a lady-in-waiting intentionally change a kingdom's religion? She refused to be the king's mistress, demanding to be his wife and queen. This demand led the king to break with the Pope and the entire Roman Catholic Church. The church she helped create, the Church of England, remains the established church to this day. Anne Boleyn is perhaps the most famous and consequential lady in waiting in all of history. She began her career at the English court in the service of Queen Catherine of Aragon, the first wife of King Henry V. Anne was not a conventional beauty by the standards of the time, but she was intelligent, stylish, and captivating. She had spent time in the sophisticated courts of the Netherlands and France, and she brought with her an air of continental glamour and a sharp, witty mind. The King Henry V, who had been married to Catherine of Aragon for many years, became infatuated with Anne. Catherine had failed to produce a male heir to the throne, which was a source of great anxiety for the king and the Tudor dynasty. And Henry was used to getting what he wanted. He had had mistresses before, including Anne's own sister Mary. He likely expected Anne to become his next lover, but Anne refused. In an act of extraordinary ambition and self-control, she would not become the king's mistress. She wanted more. She wanted to be queen. She held the king at bay, using his obsession with her to her advantage. She insisted that the only way he could have her was if he made her his wife. This presented Henry with a colossal problem. He was already married, and the Catholic Church, led by the Pope in Rome, did not permit divorce. Anne's demand set in motion a chain of events that would change the course of English and European history. For years, Henry tried to persuade the Pope to grant him an annulment of his marriage to Catherine. He argued that his marriage was invalid because Catherine had been his brother's widow. The Pope, under pressure from Catherine's powerful nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, refused. This long, frustrating struggle became known as the King's Great Matter. As the years dragged on, Henry's desire for Anne and his desperation for a male heir grew. Anne, along with a circle of reform-minded advisors like Thomas Cromwell and Thomas Cranmer, introduced the king to new radical ideas about the nature of kingship and the church. They argued that the King of England should be the supreme head of the church in his own land, not the Pope in Rome. Finally, Henry took the decisive step. He broke with the authority of the Pope. He had his marriage to Catherine declared null and void by his own Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer. He then secretly married the pregnant Anne Boleyn in 1533. Parliament passed the Act of Supremacy, officially making the King of England the head of the Church of England. This was the English Reformation. Anne Boleyn, the lady-in-waiting, had become queen. Her personal ambition had become the catalyst for a religious and political revolution. The scandal was monumental. It was not just court gossip, it was a schism that split Christendom. It led to the dissolution of the monasteries, a massive transfer of wealth and land to the crown, and decades of religious strife. Anne's own reign as queen was short and unhappy. She also failed to produce a male heir, giving birth to a daughter, the future Queen Elizabeth I. When the king's eye wandered to another lady-in-waiting, Jane Seymour, Anne's enemies at court saw their chance. Charges of treason were fabricated against her. She was arrested, tried, and executed in 1536, but the change she had started could not be undone. Her story is the ultimate example of a lady-in-waiting rocking the monarchy. She did not just cause a temporary crisis, she fundamentally and permanently altered the nature of the monarchy and the nation. A king's obsession with a charismatic lady-in-waiting led to the creation of a new national church, a profound shift in political power, and a legacy that has shaped the identity of Britain for nearly 500 years.